Testing. There we go. Good afternoon. We are here from Raven Software, here to talk a little bit about the history of the company. I have only been there 4 years, so I don't really know much of the history of the company. But these gentlemen have all been here since the 90s. I will let them introduce themselves and start talking about everything they know. Yes, you guys are old. I'm young. Sorry. All right, take it away, gentlemen.
Hello, I'm John Zook. I have been at Raven since 1996. I came out of college and this is what I wanted to do. Was lucky enough to get a job there and worked on around a dozen titles with some stretches of time where there were no titles, which we'll talk about a little later.
That was quick. Hi, I'm Eric Eastman. I've worked at Raven. It'll be 19 years in March, or May, I guess I should say. It's crazy long. I think I'm older than a lot of people out there, just at Raven. I started right out of school. I had no idea that I was going to be working in video games. I actually have a degree in English, and I had taken the GREs. I was ready to go to law school, and I was hired as a part-time job at Raven. They needed a writer for the summer. And at the end of the summer, they offered me a full-time job, and I think I was making a little under $11,000 a year, so that was huge money. It really wasn't. But yeah, I've been there a long time. I've also worked on a ton of games. It's been pretty cool, and hopefully we're just going to share some of the stories and just talk about how development has changed massively in the last 20 years.
I'm Mike Gummelt. I've been there about 16 years now. I was in college for film and skipping classes to make mods for games, and I got hired off the mod, dropped out of college, and moved out to Wisconsin. So been there for 16 years. I've worked on a bunch of different games there. I started out working on our fantasy games and then our sci-fi games like Star Trek, Star Wars, stuff like that, and now we're on all sorts of Call of Duty stuff. So yeah, it's been a great time, and it's the only place I've ever worked on games, I guess. So it's been fun.
So you mentioned we work on Call of Duty now, but you guys were there back when we were working on Heretic, Hexen, that kind of stuff. What was Raven like back then versus now? I understand it's a little different.
Yeah, when I was hired, let me see, right now we have about 100 and I think 20 some. That includes quality assurance, programmers, artists, animators, designers. We have an entire production staff. And when I started, there was 12 people, and we were in the basement under the FBI offices. So we would get random packages that we'd have no idea what they were, and they would just say FBI on them, and they'd always make me take them upstairs and stand in the plexiglass booth and hand over my ID in case it exploded, I guess. I got the fun of that. But at least when I started, I'll let these guys talk about when they started too, but this was before the internet. This was before being able to actually send files electronically. So my first project was called Cyclones. I'm sure all of you have played it. The 10 people that did buy it probably didn't enjoy it very much, but I'm still proud of it. It was the first thing that I could walk into Best Buy and way down on the bottom in the sale bin I could point out to my mom and dad that there was a game I worked on. But once you get your first game, I don't know, it's a kind of a cool thing just to be able to go in and see it. But we would work for other companies. This was when Raven was owned by two brothers, Brian and Steve Raffel. And we worked monthly milestones. So every month we had to have a certain amount of work done. And if we didn't have it done, we wouldn't get paid, and that would suck. So, and of course, just like if you've gone to school at all, high school, grade school, whatever, you always procrastinate till the very end. So we'd have very late night weekends, just working, 2, 3 in the morning. And without being able to send anything electronically, we made really good friends at the FedEx offices at the airport. So in order to get things delivered to like California on time, we'd have to drive from Madison about 90 miles an hour through the back roads at 5 in the morning to get to FedEx in time, so that, we even called ahead and had them hold an airplane once so that we could get a disc on it. And just one single disc back then was huge. So that was sort of like the beginning of our wonderful production. And now obviously we have so much more technology, that so much more things that we can do, but also bigger projects. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else.
Well, I guess I was spoiled. When I started in 1996, we had internet already. So,
Thanks, Al Gore.
the first project I worked on was Take No Prisoners. Again, I don't know if anybody's even heard of it. It's a top-down shooter. And when I started, I got the job because I had learned 3D Studio in college. And I'd made a portfolio, and now, nowadays if you saw that, it would be completely embarrassing, but at the time it was kind of cutting edge. And they said, we want you to build maps for the game, and okay, that's great. First day I was there, there was a programmer that said, I went to him, I said, what am I supposed to build? And he's like, build whatever you want. We're building our own engine, it can handle it, you just build whatever. So I built this prison, and the entire prison was about 3 million polys, which, in 1996 terms is like barely even gonna run. And I'm like, this map doesn't work, I don't know what's wrong. And he takes a look at it, and he's like, are you insane? He's like, there is no way this is ever gonna run. I said, you told me to build whatever I want. And I built bars on the jail cells and all this stuff. I built little locks and that was my introduction to video gaming. You had to learn all about limitations and what can and can't be done, and especially working with a team and understanding what is needed.
When I first started there, I remember all the artists were painting pixel by pixel with about 256 colors, I think they had, maybe more. But that was pretty cool. And obviously the artists have gone through probably the most changes in how they work from then to now, although now it's fashionable to paint pixel by pixel again, I guess. So kind of come full circle there. Programming hasn't changed much for us, since the beginning, at least not for us. So I've been pretty lucky. I'm a programmer. I remember when I first started, there was maybe 24 people, and it was really, really laid back. And people would walk around in bare feet, just doing whatever they want. And I'd come in at around noon, sleep under my desk at night if I needed to. So things are a little different now. It's a little bit more structured now, but still not too corporate. So it's still a lot of fun.
No, that's so obviously the culture was a bit different back then as well. You mentioned there were only 24 people, things were a little bit laid back. Tell us some interesting stories, I guess, about that. I mean, I understand there were a lot of pranksters far before my time. Go for it.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really involved in the pranks too much myself. My first desk was in the freak room. We had a room that had about 6 or 7 cubicles in it, and that was where I started. And there's just a lot of stories that came out of the freak room. It kind of became notorious around the rest of the office as we grew. We had our first female employee that was not the receptionist. She was hired as an artist and was in the freak room. I feel really bad still to this day for that. And she was great. Everybody enjoyed having her there. And we had this designer start, and his very first day, I don't think it was his first day, but he comes over and he says, hey, I have a question for you. I was wondering if you could tell me how to do laundry, being a girl and all. So yeah, just kind of everybody stops work they're doing and turns. And he also this guy was interesting. He came in, and it was his first week or something, and he comes up to me and he says, hey, do you have a manual for an instruction book for Radiant, which was a level editing tool. It's from id. And I said, an instruction book, what do you mean? And he says, well, you guys have your own version, and I just was wondering if there's any tips or tricks or anything. I said, no, we're using the same one that's out there that you got hired for. He said, oh, okay. So we come to find out after about 2 months that he actually didn't know how to edit levels or make levels or anything. He had gotten the job by stealing other people's work and presenting that as his own, and we've fallen for that a couple of times over the years in the past. I think, you know, as the company grows and we became more professional, more corporate, the interviewing process is much more rigorous. We don't have just one person interview now. You go throughout you have a full day interview and you get passed around to all different people, and it's very, you know, very hard. I don't know if I could go through that. When I got interviewed, it was like Eric and a couple of designers are like, "What's your favorite movie?" Empire Strikes Back. Oh, okay, you're hired.
Yeah, I think with any job you probably have the group of people that more stories are told about, and I'm probably one of them, to be honest. The negative stories, I'm not sure, I hope not. But I think as far as pranksters go, we've had a lot of different things. You know, there's a classic where saran wrapped cubes, where the entire cube was like rolls and rolls of saran wrap. Nothing super crazy there. All the way down to, we had 2 guys that came in one Easter weekend, and I think they spent like $700 because they're programmers. They're not the greatest carpenters, let's say. So they kept going back to Home Depot to buy more stuff, but they built an entire Easter bunny house out of wood. They put lights in it. They filled it with Easter eggs, and yeah, that was like their weekend was spent doing that. So we're also very boring at Raven Software, is what we'd like to say. We're not that cool, really, at the end of the day. But that's, as far as pranksters go, like mostly little things like that.
So, go ahead, you got a...
Yeah, I was going to say I remember hiring the first woman, or the first female employee, aside from the receptionist, and we were sitting in the break room, and she was coming back from her interview. You know, she walks by, and it's like a breath of fresh air, but she smells good. You know, like I've been working with like 24, kind of nerdy guys, geeky guys, and I was in the freak room, which was not well ventilated. So that was, it was, when she walked by, I was like, we have to hire her, she smells good. And, but then she ended up in the room with us, and I felt really bad for her. That was unfortunate. But it was, what do you want?
No,
No, there was something else you were saying I was going to talk about. I can't remember now, because you
I just want to throw it. So the good news is, though, is like that was, I think, as far as bringing up the first woman that was hired at Raven, we actually have a great mix of people now. As far as how things have changed from 20 years ago to today, it's really awesome to see that there's so many more programmers, artists, designers, just in general, that the female group of people are much more interested in games. So I think that's one of the really cool things about our industry in general, is that it used to be such a niche market and a niche group of people that wanted to get into it, and it's just grown now. It's just much cooler.
And for the most part, everyone smells better now. So.
Yeah.
Most of us.
Yeah, we've got strict bathing policies. No, it is cool. That's something I've noticed in the 4 years I've been there, is we've got this really diverse group of people with all kinds of different backgrounds. I mean, we have people that went to film school. We have people that did nothing even remotely related to games before landing with us. It's very much, what is your work? How good is it? Okay, you're hired if you're good enough. So talking a little more about games, tell me if I'm wrong. I think Heretic 2 is the first game all 3 of you worked on. Is that correct?
Together, you mean?
Yeah. Is Heretic 3 the first that all 3 of you worked on, or no?
Do you count expansion packs?
Okay, well, no.
Because we worked on a game called Hexen, and then that was a long time ago. That one actually did pretty decent. That's what we worked with id Software. This is around the time of Hexen was on the Quake engine. Hexen 2 was on the Quake engine. Hexen was on the Doom engine. We did Heretic and Hexen. I think the first project that we maybe all worked on together was the expansion pack for Hexen 2. So, and back then, that was, you put out a game, and right away, before you even knew how well it would do, you would go right onto an expansion pack. And this was, now it's all downloadable content. You can just turn on your Xbox and download whatever you want. This all had to go through so much more because it was something on disc. You had to go to a store to buy it. You had to, just a heck of a lot more money was spent just making them. But the returns are really good. So I think Hexen 2. the portal of Pravis. So.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So I had heard a story once about a guy who was, I guess during multiplayer tests, was building secret rooms for himself and sneaking around. What can you tell me about this?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna keep the mic. I think again, going back to, there's a lot of characters, and I think more than likely every place where you work you're gonna have characters, but I think there's a lot of people that 20 years ago, I'm gonna say, the games were more, I'd like to say difficult, but I think the real term is punishing. There was no, it was hard to find guidebooks. There's no internet that I can look up why the heck is this broken or how can I solve this puzzle. So we would have daily play tests. Multiplayer was just getting up. Doom 2, holy cow, changed the face of the world for me. And we were working on Heretic, and one of our designers on the project would, we added flight. We had Heretic, and it was all about fantasy, and you put on rings, and you could fly around and shoot people with fantasy guns, I guess you could say. And he would make walls that you could fly through that only he would know about. So at the end of the project, or at the end of the game, he's always winning like 30-1, and he's like selling it as how awesome he is. But really, he's going and finding all the stuff that makes himself invulnerable, makes him invisible, gives him all the weapon upgrades, and he was just kicking it. So I think that it just made him feel better about himself, so he could go home at night. And I don't know.
Yeah, and on the programmer side, we would make it so that if our character name was hit, it would do less damage, or we would do more damage to other people. That was the programmer way of doing the same thing.
Oh, and also cheat codes back then. You could actually type in cheat codes, IDKFA, turn yourself into God mode and stuff like that. And programmers had all the power back then. We put out a demo, you could release a demo on shareware. So you could go get this disc and it would have, share it with your friends, it's free. It's like, Xbox Live now where you can download a free demo. And they would have things like, I think in Hexen or Heretic, if you typed in Biessman, which is my last name, it would turn you into a pig. So I think that made it out there. So I'm super proud of that one. And then we had a game called Elite Force that we worked with. So it was Star Trek Voyager Elite Force, so we worked with Paramount, and it's kind of cool. We got to go out, or I don't know who all got to go. I got to go out, and they took me through the library, and they let me see a set, and it was like, oh, this is so awesome. And one of the characters that I believe this man wrote into the game was Rick Biessman, and he was a jerk. He was a jerk. Yeah, he was played by the guy that he was voiced by the guy that did McFly on or Biff on Back to the Future. So, it's great. You kind of know how you stand when your characters are named after you. And he kept saying, well, he dies a hero. I'm like, great, but he's a jerk. And for years, I would get email from people like, are you really a jerk like that in real life? Yeah, technically I am. So that's okay.
That's better than what I got. I was the guy running down the hall that you could save him by waiting until he ran past this piece of wall, and you could close a force field, or you could just close it on him and he would die. That was me. I didn't even have a name.
Yeah, and my character, somehow, since I wrote the story, my character ends up living the whole game. So you're talking about puzzles and not being able to look online to find answers and stuff. One of the great things about Raven is that I always got to work really closely with everyone from the top to bottom. So, within the first week I was working there, I was playing Magic the Gathering, with my boss, the guy who owned the studio, Brian. And so, he worked closely with us. He worked on the game with us. He was a designer on the game. And so he came to me with this idea for this puzzle in Hexen 2. It was like this really complex puzzle where you had to time travel or something. Or no, that was the sundial puzzle. But there was this puzzle. There was a 9-button puzzle that you'd have to go through in some Egyptian tomb or something. And you had to step on the 9 buttons in a certain way or you die. Or no, it teleports you, I think, right? The thing was, there was no answer to the puzzle, really. It was based on which path you took through the level. And so that way, they couldn't share the answer. Except that it just was totally overcomplicated and no one could figure it out. Because each time they went back to try it, they maybe took a different path or whatever, and they just couldn't get it. Every time they got teleported. And people online, so people would go online and try to find the answer from each other, and they would tell each other the answer that worked for them, but it didn't work for the other guys. So they were just totally confused, and it was I think that's where a lot of people stopped playing the game, unfortunately. But it was a learning experience. But it was one of those cases where maybe the internet could have helped more back then.
Okay. What other interesting things have you guys left in games? Secrets, maybe things that upset publishers, anything like that? I know of at least one that I'm kind of leaning towards here, and that's the Jedi thing, but...
I'll let Mike talk about the one that upset publishers, I guess. So I grew up when I was in kindergarten, I saw Star Wars, and that totally set me down a path of proud nerddom. I love Star Wars, all the Star Wars toys growing up, everything about Star Wars. So when we had an opportunity to actually work with LucasArts, with Lucasfilm on a Star Wars game, we did a game called Jedi Outcast, Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, and then later this guy took over and it was Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. So when we got to work on that, a little bit of like geek thrill took over, and I got to fly out, and the cool things that I got to leave into that game were, we got to work on the entire mythology with the Star Wars licenses. So if you go in the game, there's like the Lenico belt, which it's really just my girlfriend at the time's name, Nicole, rearranged to spell Lenico. And you go to the Brian R system, and Brian Raffle is our studio head, so Brian R. There was Kedjum, which was Kevin and Jim, two of the designers that were working on the project. See, these guys don't even know that. So I think that was one of the coolest things, is that I could make this like little, only I knew, maybe it was only cool to me, but it was still something that I still look back on and think that's pretty cool. And it's all canon. Well, I don't know. George Lucas didn't write it, so it's not quite holiday special canon, but it's probably right around extended universe canon.
But
So
hasn't the main character popped up in a book or something as well?
yeah, the characters came back, and that was kind of cool. And the fact, like, I'm totally diverging here, but I'm going to tell a Jedi story. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So again, going back with the whole I'm a nerd, I love Star Wars, total geek thrill. I got to go to the ranch, and this was right when Lucas was starting Episode 1, so we had no idea what was going to come out of Episode 1, 2, or 3. And I could have changed the world, but I didn't, because I didn't know what was coming. But we went to the ranch, and they showed us around, and again, as a Star Wars fanatic, I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever gotten to do in my entire life. Getting married, whatever. I'm at Lucas Ranch. No children, whatever. I'm at Lucas Ranch. And they said, you can't go up these stairs. Don't even look at these stairs. And if George Lucas walks down, don't look at him, don't breathe at him, don't talk to him, don't touch him, pretend he doesn't exist. Like, no one talks to George Lucas. I was like, okay, I can do that. I'm fine with that. And so they had this little restaurant area. It's probably about this big. And it was me and the guys from LucasArts and the guys from Lucasfilms. We were eating lunch, and we're just all engrossed in conversation about, oh, the story is going to be like this, and there's these characters, and this is what we're going to do. It's going to be so cool. And as a joke, I was like, yes, because one of the guys had worked on Monkey Island, which was a video game from a while back. That I don't know if you've heard of Monkey Island. His name was Duck Lord. That's what he went by. Duck Lord, something like that. And so I was like, oh, he said, every game I've ever worked on has had a monkey in it. I'm like, okay, well, we can think about that for Star Wars, monkeys. So we're in the middle of lunch, I'm like, I got it! Super loud, because I'm a loud man. So we're gonna have force monkeys, and they're gonna have lightsabers, and they fly around, and I'm like, and I hope George Lucas doesn't steal that for Episode 1, because it's so awesome. And the guy next to me is like, keep your voice down, dude. I'm like, what? He's like, George is right behind you. So I look, and yeah, he's eating lunch right here. And we're not supposed to make eye contact, and I'm like, oh my god. But I waited, and Episode 1 came out, and there was no force monkeys, so he lost out. That's really what it comes down to.
For talking about things that we left in games, I came from the mod community, so I got used to just doing whatever I wanted to. So when I started at Raven, and until about maybe now, I would pretty much get in trouble on a monthly basis for putting something in just for fun. But one of the things, let's see, I made it so you could launch sheep from catapults in Hexen 2. I mean, that was early on. That's dating the game. You could actually do that. We actually set up a place so that you could do that. So you could set the sheep on fire and then launch them. You could do all sorts of fun stuff like that.
Horrible person.
But the Star Wars was so Star Trek was a really fun game. I got to write it because I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and so I got to write the story for it and come up with the characters. That's how these guys end up dying, and I end up living and getting the girl in the end. But probably the biggest thing was when I was working on Jedi. Well, there's a couple things, but probably the main thing is I got to do the lightsaber combat and force powers and stuff. That's like the most fun, part. So, but I felt like the lightsaber should cut things off. It's a lightsaber, and you're fighting these stormtroopers and hitting them 3 or 4 times before they go down. So I made a console variable that would let you kill them in one shot. And then I thought, well, you should also cut anything off every time you hit them. So I had this mod. We had dismemberment in for arms, like maybe 10% of the time an arm would come off. But I made it so that anything could come off at any time, and so you could chop off their arms, then their other arm, then chop off their head and stuff. And it was just for fun, but it shipped with it. And people found out about it, and it's supposed to be a teen-rated game, and that they felt that maybe that wasn't so teen. So I kind of got in trouble for that. I think I had once made this. I think it was on the next game. I made it so you could fly. We had these X-wing models, so I made it you could get in one and fly it around, and that kind of ended up that stayed in there. But that wasn't such a big deal. We ended up releasing a mod that lets you fly through an asteroid belt or something. But yeah, that's part of the fun of the job is just being able to play around with it. I mean, that's why I got into games in the first place, was to mod them and make them do what I wanted them to do. So it's been fun.
Yeah, I'm a designer. I don't get to really put secret console variables in the game. A couple of secret rooms here and there, but a lot of the time the level designers are kind of like working right up to the last second, and there's not a lot of time to do the extra fun stuff. Back on the first game I worked on, Take No Prisoners, it was on PC, and we had just gotten the first 3D accelerated cards about a month before the game was supposed to be done, and the programmers kind of almost throw them at us, and they're like, here, put colored lights in the game, and we don't even know what that means or how to do that, or so we're, you're just working up to the last second. So I'm going to tell a Star Wars story instead. I worked on Jedi Academy, like Eric said. I was the project lead for that, and like Mike said, I'm a huge Star Wars guy. I got to write the story and the script for Jedi Academy, which was just amazing. And I remember sitting in a room with Eric, and we're trying to come up with a name for the character, because the hook of the game was you could create your own Jedi. And then he would go along with Kyle Katarn, the hero from the previous game. He was now your teacher. And we're trying to find a name that sounds really cool and futuristic and sci-fi, but at the same time could be a boy name or a girl name, and kind of fit all those criteria. And we ended up settling on the name Jaden because it's a name now that you kind of hear. It's become much more popular. Will Smith has a kid named Jaden, and Britney Spears has a kid named Jaden, and so that's the name we chose. And Lucas, went along with it. And when I was having my first child, we're trying to think up a name, and we didn't know if it was going to be a boy or girl at first, and I brought that name up to my wife and really liked it, and so that's what my son's first name is. But yeah, then it's amazing, years later, it's like 7-8 years down the road, and I was reading something about Kyle Katarn or something on some fan Star Wars site, and there's this mention of Jaden, the character from Academy, and I go to, I'm going to be really geeky here, Wikipedia, and type in the name and everything, and it has this whole history of the guy. And it says he's been in this novel and this comic book and so on and so on. I'm just amazed that something that we created has now sort of gone into that expanded universe, and that's just really, really cool. I also got to go to the ranch, but there was no George Lucas there at the time. I think he was no, I think he was actually, they were out on location, because I think they were starting episode 2 when I went. But I got the same speech about there's the stairway, you don't go up there, you will never even make it to the top of the stairs. But we got to see, a lot of really cool stuff there, and even, I don't know, it was about 3 years ago, Mike and I got to go again. Lucas has moved from the ranch to offices at the Presidio, and they've kind of incorporated everything into one group, and we got to go there to pitch a game, which ended up not happening, but we got to kind of see the whole thing all over again. So that's some of the fun of being a game developer is we have idols just like everybody else has idols, and when you get to meet them or take part in their part of the world, that's just really cool.
I never got to meet George Lucas, but when we were working on Elite Force, and I'd written, like I said, I got to write the script for that. I got to go out for casting, to LA for casting, and then I was there for about half of the voice recording sessions. And that was really cool because I got to talk to the actors and tell them about their characters and stuff, and how Rick Biessman's a real jerk and how he should play it that way. Actually, the story about that is they had cast somebody for Rick Biessman, and he was in the recording booth and he's doing his lines, and I'm just sitting there like, this is terrible. He's like not delivering the lines right. He doesn't get the character, and I'm just like shaking my head at it. And the voice director is Chris Zimmerman. She's like a veteran voice director. She's done all the Scooby-Doo cartoons. It does a ton of cartoons, voiceover work. She could tell I wasn't happy, and she turns to me and she's like, what's the matter? I'm like, he's not right. And it's like, well, who do you picture playing it? I was like, I kind of picture the guy from Back to the Future, Biff. She's like, oh, I know him. I can get him. And so she calls him up and she gets him. Well, they let him finish, but they didn't tell him they weren't going to use the stuff, so I guess he found out later. But I also got to meet some of the characters from the show. It was Star Trek Voyager. And so I'm not going to say which one, but one of them was there, and he was like, he hated the show. He was ready to be done with the show. It was like the 6th or 7th year or something. And he considered himself like a real actor, and he just didn't like the show. And so he's reading the script, and he's like, who wrote this? And I'm sitting in the sound booth, and just sitting there, and Chris Zimmerman points to me. She's like, oh, this is the writer right here. I'm like, oh no. And he's like, this is better than anything on the show. You should come write for the show. I'm like, really? It's like, okay, awesome. But I don't know if he just hated the show that much or he actually liked the script. So
you mentioned leaving the slicing off body parts thing and Jedi. One thing that I know a lot of people seem to, I guess, tie to the Soldier of Fortune games is the idea of jibbing and body parts being blown off. It's kind of disgusting, but how did that come to be? Why did you guys... Why were you so dark and depraved that you had to blow people's body parts off in a video game?
I'll let Eric talk about that. Eric was the project lead for Soldier of Fortune 1, so he probably knows all the story.
Yeah, that was a different time. That was, for those of you that don't know, Soldier of Fortune was a first-person shooter, and it really pushed the gore and the violence. And I mean, like, there was House of the Dead, and there was other games out there that were, arcade stand-up machines that really kind of pushed that. But Soldier of Fortune, we had an art director on the project who was just loved to think big, and everything about this art director was bigger, 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 and sometimes it was uncomfortably like, oh, that's too big, what are you doing? So we happened to have a programmer at the same time that just saw totally eye to eye with this guy, and they decided that they were going to try a couple different things. Excuse me. And so I can remember, we were like, look, we want it to be gritty, and we were working with the weird part is that Activision, who's our studio that owns us, back then we were just working with them. But they were like, everything has to be licensed. If it's not Marvel or LucasArts, Star Wars, Star Trek, it's not going to sell. And back then that was true. Games needed to have a license. So Soldier of Fortune is actually licensed off of a magazine that, if you have ever seen it, it's an actual magazine about mercenaries, and it's a very kind of different magazine. You'll page through it, and back in the classified sections it'll have like a picture of brass knuckles, for sale, paperweight, because they can't sell brass knuckles because they're illegal. And they'll be like looking for an artist to go to Central America and paint pictures. You know, it's like, whoa, this is scary stuff. So, but they were like, look, we want this Soldier of Fortune, and the people from Soldier of Fortune are like, we're okay, you guys can do whatever you want, but it has to be gritty, and it has to be, you know, at least somewhat true to life. And what really came, so if you've seen the game, it never actually came out true to life at all. There's a guy in a big red Christmas suit as the bad guy, but you know, at the end it's like, because our art director was just over the top, and it turned it more into an action movie, but it just sort of all came together, you know, about blowing things up. And so this programmer and this artist are working together, and they make this demo, and we put it together, and we're like, whoa, this, you know, at the time, now you look at it and you laugh because it looks super cheesy, it's super polygonal, and everything's flat, it doesn't look like a person at all. But back then, we were just getting into motion capture, just starting, where people put on suits and they get in a room and they walk around. I'm sure it's an everyday word now, it feels like it at least, like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. That's actually someone's movement pulled into the movie. So we motion captured a couple moves, and we added on this gore zone system that this guy had created, and we sent it off to Activision, and we had a publisher, a producer that worked with us, and he called me right away, and he's like, dude, what are you guys doing? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I am physically ill. I just saw that demo and I'm physically ill. I don't feel well from seeing it. It's so realistic. I'm like, oh, okay. And my boss, the owner of the studio, is in the room, and he's like, well, we know what we're doing for the game now. And it just went from there. Like, because that guy got sick, that's why I believe Soldier of Fortune went the route that it did.
While we're on the subject of Soldier of Fortune, this is kind of, I'm actually going to take some questions from the group in a little bit, but this is a question somebody asked me last night, and it's kind of a weird one. Where did the leaning around corners thing come from? Does anybody remember who dreamed that up?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically who comes up with stuff, but I think just in general, working with a bunch of talented people, ideas get thrown around, and it may have just started with someone like, man, I wish I wouldn't just getting shot on this corner. Wouldn't it be cool if I could peek around first? And I think like all of our gameplay stuff sort of starts there. I don't really know specifically. It was Mike. No, I have no idea, but it's all a group effort, I'd say. It's really good.
Cool. So you guys have collectively worked on a lot of games. What are some of your favorite, like, fondest, warm, fuzziest memories of Raven? Surely there are a few, I hope.
Well, yeah, there's a lot. Heretic 2, when we're getting close to finishing Heretic 2, actually I think when the game first came out, we would get online to play against people, and of course we knew it all because we made the game, so we made like a little clan called the Meat Wagon, and everybody had a name that was meat based. I don't remember what mine was.
Pressed hand.
That's so that was a lot of fun. Yeah, Soldier of Fortune 2 was great fun. Like, you know, I guess it was a little different in the back then than it is now. Now you finish a game and you just don't even want to look at it anymore. You're like, I am done. Never want to see that again. But no, I mean, Heretic 2, Soldier of Fortune, we played the heck out of those. Jedi Academy was probably my favorite game to work on ever, just because I was such a huge Star Wars fan, and it was just, you know, really great to be part of that. And I was there all the time, and like, you know, in the game industry you always have to work crunch, and you start to rail against it after a while, and you're like, I'm tired, I want to go home. But that was a game I was there all the time, never wanted to go home, sleep under the desk, you know. That was just amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if there's times where you hate it while you're living it, like you really detest it and you just want to just say, you know, screw it and go home and just be done with things. And then a year later, you're like, man, do you remember how awesome it was when we were, you know, putting in 36-hour days and going home and sleeping for 3 hours to, you know, come back in for another 36 hours. But I think the reason that you remember how much you love it is like, yeah, it's a ton of work, and we're deadline driven. So like I said earlier, you had to get up at 5 in the morning to drive a disc to the airport to throw it at the guy as they're taking off to make sure you got paid. And that hadn't really changed until we were actually purchased by Activision. But we still had deadlines and we still had all these things. So we would come up with we'd come up with ways to amuse ourselves at 3 in the morning while we were waiting for builds. Like you'd be done, and it was like, all right, everyone, no one can work right now because we need to package it all up and put it on this disk drive or this burner and burn it onto a disk and send it off. So what are we going to do? And we worked pretty close to Toys R Us. So, you know, the previous day we wandered over to Toys R Us. We all bought a bunch of laser tag guns, and we'd turn off all the lights in the entire office, and we'd run around shooting each other with laser tag. And we had this towel that was the towel of shame, and if you missed a deadline, we'd leave it in your cube space. You know, it's just like really stupid things, but sleep deprivation does wonders to make things cool. And
We're athletic.
yeah, and at the time we'd play football, which, you know, now 40-year-old dudes, my pristine shape just doesn't work as well. But I can remember in the pitch black, by only the light of the exit lights, with these laser guns, like crouched down in the dark waiting, and the security guard walking by with his flashlight like, what? Oh, never mind. And he'd just walk right through. We could have been burning the place down, but I think that he was so afraid of us that it didn't matter. So, I mean, we had laser tag. What else we yeah, we had the Zor Shrine. The Zor Shriners have like this big temple in Madison, and it's got like this big, huge grassy field, and there's trees. So we would like knock open the doors of our offices, and we would like play out there. And what we didn't know is that the Zor Shrine behind it, all their mechanical stuff was about 8 feet deep in the ground. It was just this big hole. And I'm chasing this guy with 2 laser guns, you know, trying to shoot him, and he's just laughing sideways, and then he disappears. We just hear, holy crow, you know, what is that? And we go, and this guy is a large dude, like I am, and he had fallen right between all the air conditioner vents and all the machinery and stuff. Didn't get hurt. So, I mean, it was a lot of really stupid things like that. We don't really do that as much anymore. When we moved from our basement under the FBI building we moved to another office, and it was like we had half of our company was up on the 3rd floor of a building next door. Yeah, we'd have Nerf gun fights. When we moved into our latest office, which is actually, I don't know what happened. Somehow they gave us a nice office. I don't know where that came from, but thank you. But when we moved in there, we would have like nighttime hide and seek like that. And we played assassin with spoons, where, you know, you wait till someone left the room and you could kill someone. And I don't remember what the big prize was, but it apparently was good because blood was shed, I think. So little things like that.
Yeah, that assassin game was great. You know, we wouldn't do actual knives or like even a plastic knife, but it was spoons. You had to spoon somebody, and so you each had your spoon, and you'd carry it with you, and you'd have a target, and you'd get a little dossier that would tell you who your target was, and you wouldn't know who was targeting you. And so, like, no one would leave their office because you were safe in your office. And not much work got done, actually. Because everyone was paranoid. And so you'd come in the morning, and you'd, like, run to your office, you know, because you don't know who's waiting for you. And we got pretty creative with it. People started throwing their spoons, but I think we said that's not legal. Or no, actually, no, we did do that.
You were spoonless.
Right, but yeah, because if you threw your spoon, you're spoonless. But I tried putting mine on a string so I could hit them all the time. But if you spoon the person who was trying to get you, you had an advantage because you were immune to them for a day, and then you knew who they were, so you knew to look out for them. So you didn't want to give yourself away. And so it came down like there was like 3 or 4 of us left, and I was one of the ones that was left. And I found I was following the guy who was my target, and everyone's paranoid, so he's like looking at me, you know, he's looking over his shoulder at me, and he's at the soda fountain getting his drink, and he's like looking at me, he's like, you got a spoon, right? And I'm like, put out my hands, I'm like, no spoon, you know, I got my hands out, and then he's like, okay, and then I reach out with my foot, because I tucked the spoon into my sandal, and I touched him with the spoon on my toe, and he looks down, and he's like, oh! So that was a ton of fun. That was a fond memory. And as far as the games go, I loved working on pretty much every game we did. I don't know if there's any one that's my favorite. I'd say probably Elite Force and Jedi were my favorite because I just love those games so much. I love those 2 licenses so much, and I got to do a lot of work on them. So that was probably my favorite experiences.
Cool. So one question I had on here that I wanted to ask you guys.